If we follow the news closely, and particularly today, there's no denying that education is facing more struggles. In addition to the fact that today we continue to see the presence of artificial intelligence, and some experts believe that because of the presence and also this continuation of development of artificial intelligence, the education today need to rethink about the structure and also the content. Now let's shift our gear. Let's focus on the word content today. In the state of Texas, some experts has been arguing that it is time that we need to Christianize the content in order to teach the moral and also teach the principles to the younger generations. And of course, this decision has faced a major backlash among the expert and also the educators. For so long that we understand when we talk about education, it is crucial that we can combine the content with religion appropriately, but without enforcing religion into the content, especially we understand how religion can create controversial conversations today, not just for adults, but also for the younger generations. Again, how do we understand that about the decision that Texas officials and believe that elementary school curriculum should be implemented with the biblical references or values? And what about other states? How complicated is the matter today? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is the Dr. Thomas Lindsay. Dr. Lindsay is a higher education policy director for the Next Generation Texas. He has more than 2 decades of experience in education management and instruction, including service as a dean, provost, and a college president. Well, Dr. Lindsay, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for having me, Will.
Well, Dr. Lindsay, it's such an honor to have you on our show. Now, I want to get started. Again, based on the information that we receive and also we've been following closely, the state of Texas officials believe it is critical that we need to implement the biblical reference or Christian content into the teaching curriculum. From your perspective, let's go to the first fundamental question. Why is this so controversial? And how come that more and more educators today are facing struggles when it comes to putting religion, or especially this biblical principles or content, into the teaching curriculum? Your thoughts?
Let me give you the backstory on this, Will, because I think you'll then see that this kerfuffle over religious content is really a diversion from the real issue. And the real issue is this. In Texas today, only half of the public school K-12 students are reading at grade level. Only half. Now, why is that? The answer is because the teachers don't have high quality instructional materials to teach. Unfortunately, before this change was made in Texas, Texas teachers suffered a double burden. Their job is to teach the students in their class and to individualize their teaching in recognition of the different needs and qualities of their students. That's a big enough job in itself. But until this bill was passed, teachers then had to spend nights and weekends putting together lesson plans. They were suffering from a double burden. Under this new Open Education Resources program, which is also called Blue Bonnet Learning, teachers get for free all the content, the student activity guides, the reading materials, letters to the parents about what they're being taught. That's the elephant in the room, as they say, is this monstrous failure, not only in Texas, but across the country, to have our students even reading at grade level. So the Open Education Resources program was designed to solve that problem. And the early small-scale tests that have been done in a couple of school districts show that especially Black and Hispanic students go up in their reading level. It's a wonderful story. That should be the news. That should be the headline. Instead, The whole battle here is over what they're calling injecting religion into the curriculum. Now, let me go to that. The section on Roman history in the Texas Education Resources Program, that section's over 300 pages. After all, Rome lasted 1,000 years.
Of course.
Very crucial. Yes. How can you understand the history of Rome without talking about Christ and Christianity?
That's right.
You can't do it. Now, having said that, the section on Roman history is over 300 pages. 8 of them have mentions of Jesus and Christianity. So you see what I mean? They have turned this into a so-called injecting religion in order to divert attention from the fact that half of our students can't read at grade level. Now, let me talk about, they say, well, you're proselytizing. No, there's a difference between teaching about religion and proselytizing. It's against the law to proselytize in a public school, but you can't teach and you can't learn if you don't understand the role of Christianity in world history.
Well, again, Dr. Lindsay, I want to go back to the article from Wall Street Journal. Again, something that you mentioned regarding the Constitution is specifically the First Amendment. And this is what the article wrote, and I quote, that Texas is one of several states that embroiled in the dispute over the boundaries between church and state in the classroom. The First Amendment prohibits state establishment of religion, but court interpretation of it have varied. So, Dr. Lindsay, from your perspective, how do we understand the First Amendment when it comes to this issue? And also specifically, again, my background, it's not what you call the judicial study. I mean, I have no whatsoever the understanding of the constitutional level. But one thing I do understand, or it's quite striking for me, it's the court interpretation of it have varied. What does that mean by that when we look at the First Amendment of the Constitution, Dr. Lindsay?
Yeah, well, it has changed throughout our history. What your audience needs to know is that when the first 10 amendments to the Constitution were ratified, 1791, called the Bill of Rights, the first of which is freedom of speech and freedom of religion, those amendments were forwarded by the states because they were worried about a too powerful national government. Therefore, the prohibition on the establishment of religion or a state church applied only to the federal government, not to the states. As proof of that, up until 1833, so almost 50 years after ratification of the Constitution, up until 1833, Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts, had its own established state church, which was constitutional because the prohibition applied only to the federal government. Now, throughout time, the Supreme Court has incorporated the First Amendment along with a number of the others to apply also to the states. So under that new interpretation, where it applies also to the states cannot proselytize. They can't in public schools try to teach that one religion is better than another. But having said that, they can't understand the American founding or world history if they don't understand the role of what is called the Judeo-Christian ethos. So it's not a question about proselytizing. It's a question about what is good education. And again, as I say to those who criticize it, how can you understand Roman history if you don't understand the role of Christianity? That's bad. That's bad teaching. So this isn't so much an argument about religion. It's about what do our students need to know to be competent, effective, knowledgeable citizens and leaders.
Dr. Lindsay, let's talk about what's happening in the state today. Again, throughout the conversations, I tried not to bring politics into our conversation, but I think it's rather difficult and also challenging without talking about it. I mean, again, before the 2024 result of the presidential election, There is no surprise that even today we'll continue to see the division and also the polarization of the nation. It's heavily divided. I mean, let alone we're seeing from this foreign policy perspective. But meanwhile, Dr. Lindsay, you were right. How can we avoid talking about religion, talk about Christ, without knowing the world history, without seeing the bigger picture? Now, from your perspective, again, we mentioned that Texas is now the only state. And recently, in the state of Louisiana, a judge recently struck down a law requiring public schools to display the Ten Commandments. And also in the state of Oklahoma, a school education officials was sued earlier over the effort to force school to teach the Bible and the Ten Commandments. I mean, again, Dr. Lindsay, let's go to another question. How much the whole controversy has something to do with the political polarization today in the States? I mean, we understand being educators, part of the job is to impart knowledge to the younger generations, is to understand, bring reading back to the class, bring the truth to the class. But because of the political division, because the political differences or polarization, everything has changed. Help us with better understanding what is happening today with education and politics.
Yes, that's a great question, Will. Well, look, from the time of the founding, the question that the founders examined was this: is religion a problem for American democracy, or is religion a benefit to American democracy? And the answer they came up with was yes, to both. Meaning they knew about religious intolerance, right? Many of them fled Europe to come to the United States, to the colonies, in order to avoid it. But they also, and of course, George Washington said it best in his farewell address. George Washington said, religion and morality are essential props of Republican government. Period. Right? Meaning, in a democracy, the people can do what they want to do. They can even change the Constitution if they have a supermajority. So the question is, how do you get the people to think not about what they can do, but instead about what they should do? The answer in the West has always been the moral code that we call the Judeo-Christian ethos. You can't understand the American founding without it.
Dr. Lindsay, let's talk about another term which it's called ideologies. I mean, again, when we talk about ideology, too often we tend to link the word ideology with politics or, ideology with military strategies or military power. But again, it seems to be today that when we talk about the ideology, it also linked with the statehood or the state of this acceptance. So again, Dr. Lindsay, from your perspective, how should we define the word ideology today when we look at education transformation, when we look at this education controversy? So in other words, are we more buying into the concept or the effectiveness of education from educational perspective, or more from this political perspective? What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, that's the battle that is going on. When I give talks on education, I tell folks the best way to understand debates about education policy, don't say education policy, say instead our future as a country. Because that, right? There is a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, and that is this: that the philosophy taught in the classroom in this generation will be the philosophy practiced in the legislature in the next generation. So, what is the role of ideology play in that? In the most general sense, ideology can be defined as false philosophy, right? As an extremist view. So in that sense, communism is an ideology. There are those who focus instead on what they believe is the danger of religion to American democracy, who would purge all references to religion from any teaching materials. Now, on the basis of their logic, think about how bad that would be, Will. Texas now requires students in K-12 to read Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. It's a classic text on civil disobedience. In that letter from Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King makes 5 references to religion. He even compares his struggles to those of the Apostle Paul. Now, under those who are arguing that we should purge religion, that means no more Martin Luther King in the curriculum. Is that what they want? Right? You see the problem?
It's pretty shocking to understand or even just to listen to what Dr. Lindsay, you just described. I mean, how can we erase that part of the history? I mean, again, there's no denying, and even there's no debate that or should we say, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King had a strong faith and belief in Christianity. I mean, again, he used the gospel as the resources to teach the moral support to the nation, especially during the most difficult time or most difficult periods. I mean, again, recently I started to read even the book on another figure, again, during that period. But again, going back to the principle, is there's no way that we can erase that. Now, let's fast forward. President-elect Donald Trump and recently promised to champion the conservative Christian movement in all sectors, especially in education. Of course, from the left, that heavily criticize President-elect Donald Trump's intention. Again, so in other words, it's quote-unquote political polarization or Christian polarization. This is not acceptable. Dr. Lindsay, from your perspective, why is the left so afraid that what we call today is the conservative Christian movement in education or in all sectors? I mean, put it in a simple way, don't you think that it's so much better that our younger generation kids today are reading and they're being educated and being guided with the Christian principles, so they're going to make good decisions, wise decisions, and not the decisions that will be regretful? Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, George Washington would agree with you completely, Will, that a people untethered from religion will decline into anarchy and subsequently tyranny. That has been the history of all democracies in the past that failed. They became first anarchic, and then things got so bad the people welcomed a tyrant. We don't want that to happen in this country, right? A people who are unwilling or unable to govern themselves will be governed by another. We know that. That's human nature. So the answer is, from where can that virtue and self-restraint come that will guide the people to make good choices in their leaders and not to fall prey to unscrupulous demagogues? And the answer for all our founders, the answer of Western civilization has been only a people whose morality is rooted in the Judeo-Christian ethos can practice freedom responsibly.
Dr. Lindsay, I got 2 more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about moving forward. Again, we're looking at the controversy in the state of Texas, and also we talk about in Oklahoma and Louisiana. What's next for the states continue to battle against this argument that we need to take Christianity out of the educational content, or we need to, like you said, it's one thing to talk about or teach about education, but it's another thing to teach moral and principles and to our younger generations. So moving forward, what can we expect in the state of Texas, and what can we expect even as a nation to take a bold stand for Christian content into the teaching curriculum? Your thoughts?
Well, I expect and I hope that the OER curriculum, which is optional and free, will spread. In other words, right now, under the law, you don't have to do the OER curriculum, right? If you do, it's free, but it's optional. Given all my conversations with Texas K-12 teachers, they are going to jump on this curriculum, right? Because it makes their job so much easier and better. They will do better. So therefore, what I expect and hope to see is that other schools, teachers, school districts will look at the success that's already been proven with this program in small scale studies and say, we need this too. And it will spread across the state. And they say here that, what happens in Texas has a big effect on the other 49 states, given the size of Texas and its influence. I expect to see this spread because I think people, by and large, have rejected the materialist, anti-God view of the left. I mean, going back to Karl Marx, you asked, why do they oppose even biblical stories, right, in the curriculum? Marx said in the Communist Manifesto that religion is the opiate of the masses. That's what they tend to believe. They want to replace religion with science, right? And that's where the debate is, and that's where we are today.
Dr. Lindsay, I want to wrap up our conversation by going back to another fundamental question. As I mentioned in the intro, we are seeing this whole revolution around artificial intelligence. And also we're seeing that teachers and especially educators in higher education really are struggling with balancing the using AI or accepting AI in the classroom. But based on what you have shared with us, we know that reading is critical, especially for the younger generations, starting with even the KG all the way to elementary school, middle school, high school. So you has been a very experienced educator and also a leader and pioneer in education. In the midst of the whole debate on artificial intelligence, how can we continue to encourage the kids to learn? And how can we encourage the younger generations to understand the effectiveness of reading in the midst of the AI revolution? Your final thoughts.
Yeah, well, your final question here is what they used to call the $64,000 question. Yes, because artificial intelligence is another elephant in the room that we face today. Now, some people fear that the artificial intelligence mechanism will continue to develop, and then it becomes a sort of Terminator kind of scenario where the artificial intelligence become self-conscious, right? I'm not worried about that because I'm not a materialist. And therefore, I do not believe that a machine will develop self-consciousness. That is something that we humans enjoy alone as gifts from God. But having said that, I have another fear, which is probably worse. It's not that the machines will develop self-consciousness and become God. It's that the people will treat it as God. And that's just as bad, if not worse.
Of course.
Right?
I mean, this is, alarming, of course.
Yes. The battle on that front, I mean, think about it if you're a leader of any country and you recognize and you say, this artificial intelligence stuff is dangerous, but our enemies are developing it right now, so we have to too. There is no stopping this. Right? It's a profound challenge that we will be facing going forward. Now, in the light of that, you ask, how do we get students to read? My 11-year-old granddaughter, whom I'm raising now, she was a devout reader until the lockdown. And then the schools gave every kid an iPad and sent them home. Ever since then, she'd much rather be on a screen than in a book. So I think the answer is keep kids away from screens when they're young. They have a natural curiosity. They will love books if that's their only alternative. But if they have this screen with the instant gratification and the dopamine surges that it gives you, forget about it.
Well, again, Dr. Lindsay, you said it. Of course, today that there's no definite answer that AI will be replaced or will be eliminated. But you're right. In the midst of the revolution, it's a good reminder that we need to keep AI or the screen away from the kids so they can understand the importance and the significance of reading. And also going back to the battle in the state of Texas, that it's good that we need to stand firm and continue to bring biblical values into the classrooms and also for the younger generations. Well, ladies and gentlemen, such an honor to speak to Dr. Thomas Lindsay. Again, Dr. Lindsay is the Higher Education Policy Director for the Next Generation Texas, and he has more than 2 decades of experiences in education management and also instruction. Well, Dr. Lindsay, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show for our future episodes. And with that said, and we wish you have a great Christmas and Happy New Year. So thank you so much for doing this.